Now, last month there was a lawsuit filed by heavyweight Manuel Cha against Don King, claiming that the WBA took bribes from Don King bribing Gilberto Mendoza for rankings. And this is how Trevor Bryan, allegedly, was able to get his fight against Daniel Dubois for the interim title or second tier title and an eliminator for the WBA belt. Then there was Greg Cohen, who admitted in sworn testimony in a civil suit to making payments in order to lobby the WBA on behalf of his fighters. And in both cases, with King and Cohen, the SCS, Sports Consulting Services, have been the go-between, and basically they're taking bungs. The WBA social media manager, Salubi Cuba, has part ownership in this SCS. It's rotten. In 1983, Bob Arum gave an interview to the Ring magazine in which he admitted to paying the WBA bribes for a bagman promoter, Pepe Cordero, in order to get Ray Boom Boom Mancini a shot at the lightweight title. Kevin Ioli says if these allegations, are not talking about what Bob Arum did in the 80s, but the current ones with Greg Cohen and Don King, he said if these allegations are proven true, the ABC, Association of Boxing Commissions, will take action and will not welcome the WBA in the United States. Sanctioning bodies have been refused recognition. The Japanese Boxing Commission did not fully recognize either the WBO or the IBF from their inceptions in the 80s until finally relenting in 2013. The JBC, the Japanese Boxing Commission, did not permit Japanese world champions of the WBC or WBA to unify with IBF or WBO title holders. And if the Japanese fighter went through with the fight and won the WBO title, he would have to give it up before defending it. The irony is that the ABC is now what the WBA used to be, a National Association of U.S. Boxing Commissions. From 1920 to 1962, the NBA, the precursor to the WBA, was a very similar organization to the ABC. The NBA was an association of nearly all of the U.S. boxing commissions at a time when commissions were much more activist and authoritative. They would suspend fighters for breaking contracts, missing weight, being convicted for crimes, for example, Rocky Graciano and Muhammad Ali, and associating with shady characters, the likes of Sonny Liston and Primo Carnero, who were partly mob-controlled. The issue that the NBA had was boxers who were suspended in one state would simply hop over to another and fight, with the new state not honoring the decision of the suspending state. This was often the case when prominent fighters and big money fights were involved. The NBA was famously never joined by the state of New York's Boxing Commission, which remained independent due to its stature and influence in the sport. Those two separate entities often did not respect each other's suspensions when prominent fighters were involved. Since the inception of the ABC in 1986 and the advent of new U.S. federal laws that tackled boxer safety in the 90s, cooperation between states over suspensions has vastly improved. However, it's far from perfect. For example, in 2019, there was a lack of cohesion between Nevada and Arizona when Nevada suspended Julio Cesar Chavez for purposely avoiding VADA drug testers, and this is Chavez Jr. Arizona did not respect the Nevada suspension and agreed to a scheduled fight for him. After some legal wrangling, Chavez Jr. prevailed, so Arizona allowed him to face Daniel Jacobs in Phoenix. Both commissions subsequently suspended Chavez Jr. indefinitely, which leads us to a big question in 2022, namely, how much power does the ABC really have? Meaning, if a big name WBA belt holder, let's say Leo Santa Cruz, with connections like the PBC and Showtime, wants to defend his title in the US, will the ABC members have solidarity and ban the WBA from sanctioning the fight anywhere in the country. Gareth Davis says that EUBANK has actually made the switch from Sky to Dazn. Now, no one else has said anything about that, but have you noticed that Ben Shalom and Adam Smith are not very vocal in the build-up to EUBANK versus Ben? Not at all, actually. So this is a Wasserman Matchroom joint promotion. Boxer XX have nothing to do with it. And Ben Shalom the other month was saying that EUBANK is exclusive to Sky. But Cali and Nice, they've been around for a long time with that Sauerland joint. And now they've got Wasserman behind them. And it looks like they're not going to necessarily tie their fighters to one network. Now, I don't know how that's going to work with Channel 5. They'll probably have a little more loyalty or commitment to Channel 5 because it's exclusively them promoting cards on Channel 5. But with Sky, I wonder if something changed when Ben Shalom was made top promoter, if you like. Because the likes of Nathan Gorman, Josh Kelly, were initially supposed to fight on Sky, and they've ended up on Channel 5. I'd like to know what the paperwork is, because Ben Shalom said that EUBANK was exclusive to Sky. Providing EUBANK doesn't retire, he said he's going to retire if he loses. Would he stay on DAZN? Would he go back to Sky? Or maybe Channel 5? If he wins big against Ben, I reckon Channel 5 would want EUBANK back over there. EUBANK's done some work over Channel 5 already. Like, don't want to rake up the Nick Blackwell fight, but that was on Channel 5. I was saying that EUBANK doesn't blow up between fights, but his face looks very full there. He's got to do all this weight cutting. Now, the weight could be a determining factor in how it all plays out, but this is the wrong time for Conor Benn to fight EUBANK. EUBANK has just discovered this new technique from Roy Jones, and yes, he did switch off after decking Liam Williams how many times, but can Ben handle that hide your punch technique that EUBANK has and the movement? Can he handle that? I saw him get frustrated against Adrian Granadas, who he beat comprehensively. Granadas was just struck, it seemed, with fear to engage with Ben. But Granadas started at 140, and although he's a big 140 pounder and a fair size welter, he doesn't have the physical presence of Chris EUBANK Jr. or the power. Few people saying that Ben can stop EUBANK. Based on what? EUBANK Jr. has a very good chin. What's that based on that Ben could stop him? Not saying it can't happen, but what's it based on? I don't think EUBANK is lying when he said today that George Groves outweighed him by 20 pounds. Because today, George Groves' promoters, Wasserman, said that George Groves struggled with the weight cut at 168. Really battled. So I believe that he outweighed EUBANK considerably. Now, is EUBANK exaggerating? It might not be 20, it might be 15, but that's a lot of weight. It might not be 15, it might be 10, but it's still a lot of weight. And Groves is a banger. Maybe they're basing their argument that Ben can stop EUBANK on the weight cut. It could affect EUBANK severely enough that Ben could stop him. Perhaps that's what they're basing it on. Now, Conor Benn versus Chris Van Heerden, Conor's last fight, which ended in a second round knockout or TKO, was made at 147. Conor came in at 146 and a half. Chris Van Heerden came in at 145 and a quarter. Now, by fight time, I don't know what Van Heerden was weighing, but they say that Ben was weighing 170. I'm not going through all the weight clause details. It's just boring, you know, like, don't want to go through all that. Too much fidgety shit. But there's no excuse for EUBANK. You lose, you lose. And there's no excuse for Ben. Like, if he gets crushed, I know they're going to try and say, well, he attempted to be great by taking on the bigger man. Yeah, fair enough. But, you know, you manage to get so many people to make a big deal about your fight and you don't perform. The internet and the boxing world's going to tear him apart.
Nathan says, EUBANK Jr. has been managed horribly. A very weird career trajectory at times, but he would have made a lot of money. Yeah, and what's up with the EUBANKs? Is this... I don't know, you know, maybe one of the channels, one of the UK channels would probably do better at explaining this to me. But why were the EUBANKs always hated? Like, even when, like, EUBANK Sr. fought Nigel Benn, like, Nigel seemed to be so much more loved than EUBANK. Even though EUBANK was doing his thing too, good boxer, good power. It just seemed like the people supported Nigel Benn so much more. And even now, it seems like they love Conor Benn out there. But Eubank get booed with every fight. Was it because their arrogance? Maybe it has to do with that.
Now, I'm going around the houses. I'm not just going to go straight into Ben Eubank and the history. We're going to go around the houses. Has the middleweight division been the best division for British boxers? Now, I know Ben and Eubank ended up in the super middle, but it all started at middle. Bob Fitzsimmons, did he beat the non-Pariel Jack Dempsey to win his middleweight title? First Brit to win a middleweight title. Well, if you go back to bare knuckle days, you had Daniel Mendoza. But, you know, we're going to stick with Queensberry rules, because that's what we do for the most part. But Bob Fitzsimmons didn't fight in the UK. He fought in America. Did he fight in Australia and for the most part? So, you know, I'm talking about fighters who have set Britain alight. Tommy Milligan, he was a very popular middleweight. He started at welter, but he won European, Commonwealth, British titles. He beat the likes of Slapsy, Maxie, Rosenblum. He beat Ted Kid Lewis a couple of times as well. He also went in there with Mickey Walker, and he was a very popular middleweight. Never world champion, but very popular. Of course, I'm going to mention Len Johnson from Manchester. By all accounts, a brilliant middleweight who was held back by the colour bar. Randolph Turpin, who beat the great Sugar Ray Robinson. Is any British fighter ever going to top that victory? How? Who against? How are you going to top it? Yeah, he did beat Sugar Ray Robinson. Didn't keep the belt long. There was a rematch clause. Ray took him back to America and cleaned him up. Someone should make a film about Randolph Turpin. Sad story, sad ending, but a great story. Tragedy and triumph. The ending. Whew. Then you had the likes of Terry Downs, very popular in the late 60s. I believe promoted by Mickey Duff. I'm going off the head here. Did he beat Paul Pender for the title? Very popular. He dated actresses, starred in films. He had a victory over a very aged Sugar Ray Robinson from Paddington. Very popular fighter. In the 60s, you also had Bunny Sterling, the dad of my late but great friend Alex. He became the first immigrant to win a British title. He became middleweight champion when he beat Mark Rowe. You had Alan Minter, who beat Vito Antuofermo for the middleweight title in 1980. The first fight was in America, but they didn't have to run it again. They ran it again because the scoring was very controversial in the first encounter. One of the judges, Roland Dakin, who used to referee a lot of bouts in the UK as well. I always remember that name, Roland Dakin. He scored the fight ridiculously wide for Minter. Minter won the second encounter in the UK. And I don't want to jump too far ahead to Minter. There was the Finnegan brothers. You had Chris Finnegan, light heavy, and you had Kevin Finnegan, very good fighter. Both the Finnegan brothers were very good fighters. His brother Chris was an Olympic gold medalist. Kevin, he won the British title, beating the likes of Tony Simpson, European title. He fought the likes of Ayub Kaluli. He fought Marvin Hagler twice in America. Took on the likes of Frankie Lucas. Frankie Lucas was one character. He fought Alan Minter. They had a few fights. Kevin won one of them, but got the worst of the series. It was actually Kevin Finnegan who took that middleweight title from Bunny Sterling. Tony Simpson, who ended Minter's career, knocked him out. British champion. He beat the likes of Mark Kaler. John Collins knocked him out. And Dwight Davidson, was he the first man to beat Dwight Davidson? Challenged Marvin Hagler for the title. Big left hooker, stocky, strong, very popular fighter, very popular, from Leicester. I believe Davidson was ranked number 1 or something in the world. It was an eliminator. And that's the fight that got him the shot against Hagler. He didn't get it straight away, but Simpson was a very good fighter. He fought Frankie Lucas as well. That's a bit of a crazy fight. Yeah, you had Mark Kaler, the West Ham following, bit of racial tension in some of Mark's fights. Like, people always talk about the Errol Christie fight. That's the one that made the front pages of the Red Tops. Because, was it a press conference where they started fighting and rolling around on the street? And it really caused bad racial tension. You know what I mean? Like, some of you know Cass Pennant, former West Ham top boy football supporter, you know, he was all up in it, and they had to get him to kind of, all right, you calm it down, you calm it down, you calm it down, and to get the likes of him in. Yeah, Kayla versus Christie, controversial. The racial tension actually was in the workplace I was in when I was a kid in the warehouse. It was pretty bad, and the bosses had to come down and said, stop discussing this fight. That's the fight people know, but they don't know about the Roy Gums fight, the Kayla Roy Gums fight. Yeah, like very hostile West Ham fans. Everybody knows about Minter and Hagler. They know about what happened there. But there was a lot more than that in British boxing history that's been covered up. And Kayla was a good fighter. He was a good fighter. He lost to Buster Drayton, Simpson, and Harold Graham. But the Errol Christie fight is the fight he's remembered for in the UK. Errol Christie had a glittering amateur career, but he just couldn't cut it as a pro. He lost to Kayla. It just didn't work out for him. Just the pros just didn't work out for Errol Christie. Then you got Harold Graham from the Winkerbank, Dominic Ingle. He basically laid down the blueprint for that Winkerbank style. Harold Graham, great fighter. European, British, Commonwealth, largely avoided by Ben and Eubank. And Michael Watson. If we're going to keep it real, James Cook, he's currently co-training Anthony Yard with Tunde. Ask James Cook how good Harold Graham is. He took Harold Graham on for the British title, and James Cook was no slouch. He put the first L on Michael Watson's record. And it was Watson, Ben and Eubank. Great time to be a black athlete in the UK. They just had this chemistry. Like, Watson was the quietly spoken, God-fearing, Christian, good kid. Nigel Benn, he used to have this highlight reel that they used to play on ITV. And they used to have that song. And you just see him folding up all these boxes in the highlight reel, just folding them up, man. And he was a geezer, wasn't he? He was a geezer. I mean, Essex didn't take no shit. Knockout puncher. He liked to party as well. He lived on the wild side. Let's just leave that there. Eubank, you know, he came back from the Bronx because he was getting in trouble up Peckham, which isn't too hard to do, getting in trouble in Peckham. So he went to America, had his first 4 fights, I believe, in America, then came to the UK. I believe he was with Keith Miles, a Brighton business owner. Like Eubank said, I had to sleep on Keith's floor. He had no money and everything. And like, Keith did a party where he was going to introduce Eubank to the boxing industry. And they put on a big spread. And I think no one barely turned up. And, you know, they said Chris was there and he was speaking in an American accent. And he was a little more militant, black conscious. But he switched up. He switched up the whole thing. Then he became the English gentleman with the aristocratic accent, the joffers, the monocle. He said boxing was a mug's game, and that didn't go down well with the media and certain sections of the industry. Vaulting over the top ropes, looking at his opponents with total disdain and doing poses mid-ring and a lot of stuff that hadn't been seen in the British ring. Nassim Hamed actually tried to say that Chris stole his style. But Nassim was actually still an amateur when Chris was a pro vaulting over the ropes. It was crazy. Chris was sort of like a role model, a mentor to Nassim, and then they fell out. I believe they had a bit of a scuffle at the airport. But yeah, Eubank was just off the chain, and like, it was just like, wow, these three. And I don't think a lot of people outside the UK understand what it's all about, but a lot of the British people know. They know exactly what I'm talking about. The excitement that they brought to the television. And I'm not going to go through their whole fight series. It's going to take too long. Watson put the first L on Nigel Benn's record. Then he drew with Eubank. Lost the return, and that was Michael's last fight. Ben took on Eubank, defending his WBO middleweight title. Eubank stopped him. Highly anticipated fight. The rematch didn't happen until some... 3 or 4 years later at Old Trafford, and it was scored a draw. Somebody brought up that 18 million people watched it across Britain. The 80s and 90s was just a great time for televised events, wasn't it? It was just like outstanding. They were rock stars. They were rock stars, man. Ben and Eubank, they were rock stars. answering Boxing Wave, who started this, who I took a snippet from, he was asking why Eubank was so disliked. Eubank voluntarily took the role as the villain, and he was just different. Like when he fought Kid Milo, and he rocked Kid Milo into the ropes and could have finished him, and he just stopped punching and let him off the hook. And I believe Milo's corner pulled him out shortly after. And this was before he incapacitated Michael Watson. He was just different when he fought the likes of Gary Stretch defending that WBO belt. Stretch, he was a model, did acting and stuff, and they called the fight the Beauty and the Best. Like Eubank was the best or the beast. He was always the villain, and it's just something he did. The media, they didn't get it, and sometimes when the media don't understand things, they fight against it. Like Eubank, I believe it was at one gym when he came back to the UK, and they didn't like the way he was hitting the speedball. It was totally unconventional, but he said he learnt that in America, and he had to leave the gym. He used to drive this giant American truck, and I remember he protested against the war in Iraq, and he drove the truck through Downing Street, staging this protest. In another middleweight defense, he fought Dan Sherry, who was trained by Pepe Correa. Now, Dan Sherry was a bit of a frustrating fighter to deal with, and he was doing all these tricks and trying to embarrass Eubank, and he had his bag of tricks with him, and he kept doing this move where he would end up behind Chris Eubank, like, look, you're facing the wrong way. And there was one time it happened, Eubank threw a light headbutt with the back of his head, and it caught Sherry, and Sherry was obviously trying to win the title by nefarious means. Eubank was deducted a couple of points for the headbutt. Sherry was unable to continue, and Eubank won the fight. Eubank kept his title, and the press, they weren't happy about that. The Gary Stretch fight came after. The Watson draw was very controversial, and Watson was furious. The press were furious. The British public were furious. They didn't like Eubank. The rematch at White Hart Lane, which is the home of Tottenham Hotspur Football Club, the North London rivals to Arsenal, who Michael Watson supports. Watson came out in Arsenal shorts. Eubank came out in the Tottenham shorts. And I'm assuming it was a pro-Watson crowd. Tim Westwood, he was playing music at the event, and Watson chose Mama Said Knock You Out from LL Cool J.
It was fierce. It was ugly. I became the stigma that they said I was. I became the villain. I felt I was the villain. There was no way, I should lose this fight. Because if I did, then I would be cast as the character that they had seen, or that the media had pushed, and that wouldn't be right.
11 stone, 13.
Tim Westwood was talking, Michael chose Mama Said Knock You Out to sum up the energy that he was bringing. They were calling Michael the people's champion. And Eubank was saying in the documentary, Michael never used Mama Said Knock You Out before. Talk about added pressure. The ring action, the theatre between the three, like what happened to Michael Watson after a dour struggle in that stadium. They took Michael to North Mid, who didn't have the correct equipment to deal with brain injuries, and had to take him to Bartholomew's, which is a couple of miles away from Edmonton. Michael lost priceless minutes, but he's made a recovery. And then there was the fallout from that, the remorse, the heartbreak for Eubank and Watson and anyone connected, and boxing was in mourning. Where does it go from here? The British Boxing Board of Control had to go through reform, and paying out Michael Watson basically bankrupted them. That's the fact responsible that any card you're holding, you need paramedics on deck, doctors, anaesthetists, I hate pronouncing that word, ambulance on standby. You need all of that in place because of that fight. Look at Nigel Benn. He went to America, knocked out Doug DeWitt, went back again, knocked out Iran Barkley, knocked out Gerald McClellan, the most dangerous man in boxing. That must not be understated. Mini Mike Tyson was the most dangerous, feared man in boxing, and Ben destroyed him. The first Eubank fight was just wild, but controlled boxing at the same time, but just vicious. Eubank's tongue was severely lacerated after he said he wanted Ben tested. And the British press and certain sections of the public, anything Eubank said was put under a microscope. Oh, you trying to say Ben was cheating? No, he was complimenting Ben. Like, how can he be so relentless? It was a compliment. Then you've got Eubank defending his title 4 or 5 times a year. Yeah, the super middleweight title, the WBO super middleweight title. So it was almost like every couple of months there was a Eubank fight on Sky or on ITV. There was always a fight. So he became ubiquitous. And some of the fights weren't good, and some of them were controversial decisions. But he was there all the time in the ring. And there were phases where he was unpopular, but when he came back and fought Joe Calzaghe and pushed him really hard, and then the 2 Carl Thompson fights at Cruiser, the public and the press loved him. But the British public and press are strange like that. You know, the Eubanks also participated in one of the early reality TV programs, a documentary about the Eubank family. And you saw Chris Jr. and the rest of the family. Lennox Lewis was in there. Before the second Eubank and Ben fight, there was this program they did in conjunction with the fight upcoming. And there were pop stars, television stars, media people, and they were all in there looking forward to the fight. Like I said, great time to be a black athlete. Like, you had the influx of black footballers in what was then the first division. Viv Anderson became the first black man to be capped for England. John Barnes, you had the West Bromwich Albion trio, Batson, Regis, Cunningham. My mum used to look after Laurie Cunningham. Frank Bruno, huge, absolutely huge. Most popular sportsman in the country. Linford Christie. And Watson, Ben and Eubank, they just encapsulated the times. And like I'm saying, TV was just phenomenal 80s and 90s. Like Barry McGuigan, his numbers when he won the title against Pedrosa, huge. You're talking, 20 million, whatever it is. Don't quote that. I mean, you can quote the real figure. Big, huge figures.
You're taller than I thought you'd be.
Ain't gonna make no difference, mate. You know what they say about the bigger they are, didn't you?
Yeah, I've heard the same.
Yeah. It's mad to think you can walk through me, you know.
You've got to be confident, huh?
Yeah, delusional, yeah.
We're both just a bunch of delusional motherfuckers, huh?
Yeah.
That's okay. Okay.
I love the smugness, though.
And yes, their sons haven't scaled the heights that their fathers have scaled. Of course not. But they've done enough to have a lot of people curious about what will happen in this fight. Eddie Hearn is saying it could break over 1 million pay-per-view buys. Now, is Eddie just doing his promotion thing? Of course he is. Out of the 2 dads, Nigel wants it more than Chris. Nigel laid down the gauntlet to the Eubank family, let's have it. But according to Chris Jr., he hasn't spoken to his dad since the fight was made. Apparently, Eubank Sr. wanted the fight to be built up a little more. Take a few more fights and put it in a stadium. Is that the reason why Senior is not enthusiastic about it, or does he not really relish of dredging up the old animosity again? Callie said it's going to be Wasserman fighters against Matchroom fighters, which sounds good when you first hear it, but who have they really got? I mean, for a long time, when Josh Kelly was on Matchroom, they were talking about Josh Kelly versus Conor Benn, but that fight has long since went off the radar since Josh Kelly got his ass whooped by David Avanesian. Off the top of the head, the best Wasserman Matchroom matchup that would be valued to the undercard would be Fabio Wardley versus Nathan Gorman. That would be good for the vacant British title. I want to big up Cop in 09. So, do I believe Tony Sims that the fight will be off? Let's say Eubank comes in at 159. The catch weight was made at 157. Tony Sims said if Eubank comes in anything over 158.5, the fight's off. So if he comes in at 1.9, you're going to call the fight off? Compin 09 said he ain't going to call it off. There's going to be too much pressure on them. And that's interesting. Hope Conor ain't got no ideas of pulling a Jake Paul. The British public will not be amused. News in brief. It says here that Joyce versus Parker will come with a pay-per-view price tag on top of the BT monthly subscription fee, as much as £30 depending on your provider. That's a lot of money. More than what Fury and Dillian White was, and it's more than what USYK Joshua 2 will be. How do they justify that? Tyson Fury has vacated the Ring Magazine title, and that's going to be on the line along with the other straps when USYK and Joshua joust it out for the unified titles next week. The British Boxing Board of Control, you need to explain this one, right? How Marcus Morrison has won one fight of his last three, that win being against an opponent with a 9-128-2 record. Yes, he was knocked out by Zach Parker in his last fight and outclassed by Chris Eubank last year. And now you've rewarded him with a British title shot against Denzel Bentley. Frank, what's going on here? Is this the best opponent you could get for Denzel? I'd rather see a Udofia rematch. It's ridiculous. And it's a voluntary, so Frank Warren, it's not exactly a ringing endorsement for the British title, is it? Could have done a bit better.